Okay, you are live. Brian, feel free to take it away.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Got it. Sorry that I had an issue there, but thank you all for joining us. My name is Brian Hobbs. I'm one of the overseers of the Hyperledger Atlanta group, and today we have a very special guest, Michael Zan, who is the author of one of the Hyperledger Fabric V2 migration books. And he's going to do us the honor today of giving us an overview of some of the best practices. And so with that, what I'll do is just turn it over to Michael and I mean, Matthew, I'm sorry, and let you go from there.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Brian, for having me. And again, thanks, David from Hyperledger. It's pleasure to present at Hyperledger community. I have done this presentation in Hyperledger community several times before last year. And again, it's always a pleasure to be in your community. And this time Atlanta is my first time in your community. And so the thing is that one of the reason for me to do this talk and presentation is that in Hashflow, we run a couple of clients that run this issue of Fabric migration to version 2. And because version 2 came out last year, and so there was a little bit of discussion around, okay, what's best practices to do this? And today I'm going to talk about that because, again, it comes back from very practical perspective of the client. And when you mentioned your companies also have the more or less the same challenges right now with regard to migration to version 2. So having said that, let's continue on this presentation. So it's a little bit information about me. So the company I'm presenting is Hashflow, and I'm Matt Zan, and a little bit later I'm going to talk about my bio in the next slide. So again, in this presentation, we're going to talk about how to migrate to Hyperledger Fabric version 2. I'm going to talk about Hyperledger Fabric, some of the key components and its architecture. Then I'm talking about some of the key highlights of Fabric version 2, and then some of the best practices for migration. And then I'm going to talk about some of the things that my company can do if you guys would be interested to get more assistance in this process. So, so the first thing that I just want to know is that how much do you know about Hyperledger? Because if you have watched my previous YouTube videos in Hyperledger community on my other talks, I tend to just scratch the surface. I usually don't go too much detail in the Hyperledger deployment, but these talks might be a little over the intermediate to advanced level, and some areas a little bit advanced. So so I'm assuming that you already know what this Hyperledger is. You know about Hyperledger ecosystems, different libraries, distribution ledger technologies in the Hyperledger community, and more specifically, you know how the Hyperledger Fabric works. So again, I just to give you some preview of Hyperledger Fabric. So assuming that, then a little bit information about me. Again, I'm like entrepreneurs, and so I have started a couple of tech companies like DC Web Makers, Web Design, App Design, then Coding Bootcamp, completely for trading, and then Hashflow for specializing in blockchain consulting and development. And then I have like a nonprofit that we do teaching for coding for high school kids. And then I'm also a leading author of the hands-on smart contract developments Fabric version 2. This book talks about how you can deploy how you can use the Fabric version 2, how you can create and deploy your smart contract Fabric version 2, and many other topics. So, and again, beside that, I'm quite visible in the community, in the blockchain community. If you search my names in Google, I'm going to show up most likely. But anyway, again, I also have some background in business. I have MBA from University of Maryland. So beside my technical or non-technical or bio, you can find more information on my LinkedIn. So today, this is an outline of some of the things I want to talk today. So I want to talk about Hyperledger Fabric architecture and component. And then I'm talking about some of the new features that are introduced in Fabric version 2. And then I'm going to talk about when you're upgrading or migrating to the version 2, what are the capability level you need to watch from a channel, and what are the components you need to upgrade, and what are the consideration of getting version 2, what are the things you have to watch, what is a checklist of things you have to be careful before you migrate, right? Well, so for the fabric, the major component of fabric, Hyperledger fabrics are as follows. Peer ordering service, and a little bit I'll talk about some of these items more in detail in coming slides. It's just a very high level. We have peers, we have ordering service, we have certificate authority on the fabric, manages all the identities and credentials in the network. And certificate authority can be very simple, or it can be very more complex, like hierarchy. And the fabric ledgers, and then we talk about channel, and then a smart contract or chain code. So basically, a smart contract you already know. Chain codes can be like a wrapper around certain number of smart contract in the Hyperledger. So if you're coming from Ethereum background, I mean, if you have a Ethereum kind of the development background, you're already familiar that there is a one or two smart contract in a blockchain network. But in some of the enterprise consortium, you may have multiple smart contract, and so many of them. But in the fabric, you can easily chain them, wrap them around together as a chain code. That's why the chain code comes. Endorsement policy, which again, if in blockchain, you also may know this as a consensus algorithm, is a part of that consensus algorithm. And in fabric, I didn't mention here, but in fabric, the policy itself have so much stuff there. Policy in fabric tells who does what in the network, who is allowed to do what in what circumstances. I mean, all the access control list, all the things that has been defined in the network comes under the policy. And again, membership service providers, it just goes back to the CA certificate authority and who is allowed to issue those credentials in the network. So let's see a little more detail about some of this component. And again, if you're new to Fabric and if you want to dive into detail about this component or learn this stuff more in depth, there is a link to my presentation. You can download that. You can read this slide after this. And obviously, you can get my book and just go over some of this topic. We discussed this in more detail in our book. So, so one of the things is that one of the things about Hyperledger Fabric that makes it very unique compared to other blockchain platform is ability to be expanded into the consortium architecture. So meaning that from very basic architecture of two kind of the member to a multi-layer kind of the member, the consortium or the structure of the fabric support that. So that gives a very unique advantage when it comes to enterprise blockchain deployment, where they want something that is easily can be expanded, So in the network of the fabric, again, the Hyperledger fabric is a private network, so only the members are that can be joined the network. So in the fabric network, usually there are organizations that are member of that, and there's a certificate authority that issues the credential or identities of this participant. So the role of each organization either is as orderer, ordering service, or a peer service provider. So I'm going to talk about orderer later, but orderer is, as his name signifies, is in charge of ordering the transactions, because the transaction comes from the come to the system from the network members. It goes to orderer. Orderer is going to sort them out, send them to the peer that need to decide on that transactions. And once the consensus or endorsement is achieved, orderers add that kind of the transaction record to the ledger. So that's at a very high level, most simple way of looking at the orderer, right? So each participant company consists in one peer in the fabric. Peer can be like a node, and at the same time, each peer can have multiple nodes. So so each peer node maintain a state and a copy of distributed ledger. So I'm going to talk about state and ledger. So at a very high level, in a node in the fabric, you can have a state database and a ledger. What's the difference? I'm going to repeat this in a couple of slides, but I try to make it as simple as possible. A state database is mutable, meaning that you can change the data in it. On the other hand, the distributed ledger is immutable and is shared among all the members in the network, right? So each organization can have its own, state database, CouchDB, which is like key value, like a MongoDB. On the other hand, distributed ledgers is immutable and it manages by the main network because it's distributed. And so orderer, as I discussed earlier, his job is to coordinate all the transactions in the network. And so when a transaction comes in, then orderer service validates orders and bundle all transactions into the block. And then have you heard of like gossip protocol, broadcasts all the peers? So basically, when we talk about gossip protocol, things like that, gossip algorithms comes back to orderer, because when a transaction comes, orderer sends this transaction to the peers that they need to decide whether accept or reject that transactions. And it's like two-way communications. Once they get back to the orderer with endorsement policy, orderer is gonna commit that to the ledger. Order organization also can have multiple nodes, and then which again comes back to the consensus protocol based on how the consensus protocol has been set up by the organizations. Again, it goes back to policy. In the fabric policy, you can define what endorsement policy would look like. Like, for example, for certain transaction, what is the endorsement would it look like? And then another thing is in the fabric is that entire network in the fabric can have multiple ledgers, and each ledger is maintained by the channel. Again, in the channel, you can look at the channel as a virtual network. And so in a way, physically, it's just a ledger itself, right? And then distributed and centralized in the peer node. So again, one of the things is that when I talk about private data collections, you have a better idea how the channel works, because and the fabric private data collection allows certain parties in the network to create a certain private data communications. So that has been done through the channel. So and then a little more architecture of fabric. Each organizations can participate in multiple channels. So the thing is that again, for example, we can have channel 0 which has organization 0, 1, 2, 3 as a participant, and channel number 2 which has these two. Again, if you look at it as a private data, on this channel, 3 organizations can change or exchange data, right? And then they can have their own policies with respect to the endorsement. Versus under this channel, only 2 organizations can participate and exchange some data. So as I said, once you add more member component to the fabric, the architecture become more complex. And so at this, again, to some people, it might act as a disadvantage. But in reality, this is again, it's more suitable for enterprise. Participant endorsement and validation policies are maintained in each channel. As I mentioned, each channel can have its own participant endorsement and policies defined in itself. And so there is another channel called system channel. Sorry, there's another channel called system channel that is called like admin channel for the main network and for administering the entire network. So to recap, there are some policies which has been defined in a channel for the members inside that channel. And there are some policies defined at a very high level by the system channel, which regulate the activities inside the whole network. Now, when it comes to certificates, which is like identities in a network, Hyperledger Fabric has something called root certificate authority or key store. So it's similar to the policies. When it comes to the certificate authority, there is one admin, like owner of the network or admin, that has a root certificate authority, and it's like a hierarchy from top to bottom. And then when it comes to the bottom, then you have other member certificates. So membership service providers whose job is to manage this identity and certificate, authority certificate for the members in there. So there is a main admin, which is in charge of membership service providers, and then under that comes each individual members, which they have their own credential, and the credential gonna tell what the member can do, cannot do in the network. So each peer organization can have its own MSP too, but again, you have to understand the Fabric. Everything is hierarchy, from the top admin to comes to the individual members. When some new organization join in this sound channel, this organization first start to enroll MSP in Genesis block or channel. Genesis block is the initial block of that kind of the ledger, and all organization participating in the network should be enrolled in consortium on that system channel. Again, just to simplify this, what he's trying to say is that one organization's when it's registered, going to be registered both in system channel for main admin of the network, as well as inside the channel, where those parties that on that specific channel can approve it. You know what I mean? So when a new client, CK, connect to the organization, the client also require the connection profile, what's called part of the MSP. So just to recap, membership service providers manages IDs from different parties. One is for whole network, individual channels, and members, as well as for external parties that they want access and fetch and query the channel. So this is done by connection profile, creating connection profile and credential for them. So a little bit more graphical way of looking at how these different Hyperledger Fabric architecture works is that there's a system channel, and there is a channel 1 and channel 2. And then, so there is an orderer, and there's one organization, 2 organizations. As you notice that channel 01 or first channel, they have 1, 2, 3 members. So as I said, orderer is there for all the network, right? And it's like independent. Then you have two organization part of the channel 1. For channel 2, you only have peer and the orderer. And then, so basically, that gives you an idea. So system channel is like a main admin that is in charge of the whole, but then you can have multiple different channels, and each channel can have its own members, own policies. So now we a little bit talk about Chaincode or smart contract in a Fabric. And then again, in the following slide, a little bit more talk about Chaincode in the Fabric, because on the Hyperledger Fabric version 2, some of the major changes are related to the Chaincode. And so when you want to execute the Chaincode in some node, the code should be installed on this node. Again, if you're Fabric developers, you might say, okay, it's obvious, I know that. What's the big deal? The result state is written in the state database, and its transactions is logged on the ledger. So let me simplify what it says. So basically, once you have a node, if you wanna run the Chaincode on that node, first you need to install the Chaincode or smart contract on that node. And once the installation is finished, then its record going to be stored on the state database, and then as well as a ledger of that node. A state database is a very generic key value database. It's, again, if you know MongoDB or NoSQL database, that's it. It's similar to that. So there are two popular kind of the state databases that you can use, or NoSQL database that you can use with Fabric. One is the LevelDB, which is a default database, or you can use CouchDB, which gives you more power and flexibility. Again, as we discussed before, a state database data are mutable, meaning that you can easily modify them, alter them. However, the transaction logs are immutable because they are located on the decentralized ledger. So when something happened to the a state database get lost, we can go back to the decentralized ledger and regenerate the whole things automatically because that decentralized ledger is already there, right? So let me little bit graphical. Then I think we are almost done with the architecture. Maybe one or two slides we are done with the architecture. Then I jump into the version 2 quickly. So again, graphical way. If you look at this, there's a chain code here, and there is different nodes, and then each node has to be installed the chain code in order to work. And again, the thing is that a state is keeps consistent through the ledger. It's because ledger is immutable, and then the state may mutable. So state may change, but through the ledger, it's automatically going to synchronize the state with all the participants in the network. Again, if you're coming from the Syrian web developer, you know how the blocks are synchronized, how you can avoid the forging of the block. Just jumping into the Fabric version 2 new features, right? And again, I just want to scratch the surface because a couple of these topics here are a little bit more advanced. So one of the things is that on the Fabric version 2, so we have decentralized governance of the smart contracts, new chain code application patterns, automated checks and decentralized agreement, and external chain code launcher, a state database cache or CouchDB, and then we have kind of some of the new features of Docker images like Alpine base, which are supported, and private data enhancement. So the first two items, decentralized governance and new chain code applications, are part of something called a smart contract or chain code lifecycle management. So they are part of that, and then I'm going to cover them in a more graphical, very nice way. I mean, in coming slides. But just gives you idea is that in the old version of Fabric, like 1.6, there was one owner of the network that was in charge of the kind of the chain code in the Fabric. So whenever all the participant in the network was following that principal or the owner of the chain code. So any change wasn't needed, the principal owner was in charge of doing that and updating that. Now, in a very plain language, this has been changed in Fabric version 2. So all the participants in the network now can have a say in the upgrade, and the additions of the alterations of the smart contract or chain code in the network. So that's all this is about. Which again, when I'm talking about chain code lifecycle, it makes it simple and understandable how these things have been changed. With regard to external chain code launcher, right? Again, some of the area or issues that we had with external chain code launcher was that for the Docker images or things like that, you need to have a privilege to access that. This comes back to the owner. So you have a specific privilege to do that. And then one thing was that there was some issues with peer implementations because the version 1.6 of Fabric, you require to have only Docker, and then you need to have a specific permission to access the Docker and to do that. And then of course there was some peer implementation, which a little bit talk about that, was some barriers to maintain the chain code. So to put it this way, the version 2 of Fabric allows developer to access the chain code externally and manage and maintain it, which helps them a lot in terms of the eliminating a lot of complexities involved in managing and maintaining the chain code in the Fabric. And with regard to state database cache, again, if you're developers, you know, it speaks for itself. So basically, CouchDB now is more efficient right now because using the cache is become more is friendly for performance, you know. And then, of course, if you are coming from Docker, you know that it's just features added. It's going to add more kind of the resilience to the Fabric network. I'm going to talk about private data enhancement following a slide because it's very important. One of the things is that with regard to private data collection Fabric 2, as you see the channel 1, so this channel 1 and then channel 3, right? So this is, you can look at this channel as the system channel, right? And then you have 2 different channels. So again, on the Fabric version 2, basically, as we discussed earlier, each channel can have its own policies, you know, with regard to the data collections. And then I'm going to show you in the next slide that even inside the ledger of channel 2, each members can have their own private data without any visibility to other members in a network. I emphasize this is very important because some of the clients that we are dealing right now, they love this feature. And that's one of the, because some of the legal requirement from government requires that you keep your confidential data without sharing with other members. So that's one of the areas that Fabric going to be handy. So, so one of the things is that, so again, you have to make a distinction between private data and public data collection in the Fabric. And as you can see in the peers, there's a public data storage and private write set storage. And then, so this, for example, this area is a public word state, and this area is private, which only visible to the members. So just a little bit give you a recap. A peer can be a member of different channels at the same time, right? Just give you an idea of complexity that you may run into. So one peer may be a member of different channel as well as system channel, right? So for each channel that a peer members, a peer may be involved in certain private activities. So it gives you an idea that there are different private collections with respect to different channels in which the peer is involved, right? And that there is also, with that one also goes private data, you know, private database, or, you know, or a state database that goes with that. So as I said, once you get more into the Fabric and implement it at the enterprise or consortium level, you run into more advanced and more challenging, you know, architecture. So coming back to what I discussed before, as I said, each peer can be a member of different, you know, can be a member of different kind of the public and, you know, and private kind of the network, right? And then channels. So depending on what membership that he has, certain data are going to be private stored in them, certain data are going to be private stored in them. And as you see, it just gives you a schema of how the system channel communicate with different peers, and then each peers and peers how communicate within using the kind of the private data collections. And I'm emphasizing when it goes to practical perspective, it's become much more complex. Because we're talking about just a couple of data set, but if you're running to the practical perspectives, become much more complex. So, so one of the things also is good to know, and as developers, you might also want to know, is that, well, now that we know that there's a private data collections and things like that, because as discussed earlier, I explained how the orderer works and how orderer and the gossip protocol and then what's called endorsement policies work in a channel, a system channel as a whole, in a network as a whole. On the other hand, as a developers, you also need to know how to create or how the transaction inside the private channel works. And it's very important because the thing is that there is a transaction flow for Fabric as a whole, like a Fabric network as a whole. But then when it's coming to the private data collections, or between the certain members, then you have another kind of the private data collection architecture, as you see. So the client submit the proposal response and submit transactions, ordering service. So again, as you see, a record of that going to be on the ordering service, even though it might stores on the kind of channel itself of that private network. So now moving on to another area of the Fabric. So as I discussed earlier, one of the significant changes we experience in version 2 is the Chaincode Lifecycle operations. This one, as you see right now, this is architecture of the Fabric version 1.4. So as I mentioned earlier, one organization was the owner, and he was in charge of managing the chaincode, making alteration, update in chaincode, and defining instantiation policies in the network, right? And so basically, all the packaging installation was done by this guy, and so basically, one of the problem with this architecture was the fact that it was not much democratic, because these people had no say in the chaincode, changes or alterations, or approving or rejecting some of the changes that is made to the chaincode. And as a result, we in the version Fabric 2, we are seeing that the new kind of the decentralized architectures take place, where all the organizations that are involved, or members of the network, have a say in approval and rejection or alterations of the chaincode. So basically, based on the policy, this organization can also accept or reject the changes that is made to the chaincode. And if the approval is achieved, then that change is going to be committed to the channel. So, and then again, so this architectures also allowed for acceptance of the Kubernetes in addition to the Docker, because before only was Docker, but now we can also use the Kubernetes node on the Fabric or cloud native. And then also is the fact that and also it's it just gives the network kind of the more role of maintaining and deploying the chaincode in the Fabric. So now that we cover everything on that end, we move on to another topic we talk about, is that how to update the capability level of a channel, right? So when you're migrating to version 2 of Fabric, you need to update the capability level of a channel. So when you're updating to the latest versions, you need to upgrade the Fabric channels and component in the channel. So you have to update the orderer and the peers. So when it comes to updating the capability level, you have to do that for each configuration of each channel, right? In like configuration of each channel, because again, if you remember, certain members can have certain channels among themselves, and each configuration of those channels need to be updated. And these version capabilities need to be closely related to the node binary versions, because they have to be synced, When it's defined, it must be present in a Fabric binary. For example, when a new master service membership service provider type is added, the new binary can validate those signatures of transaction, while the older binaries may fail. So I'm going to talk about things you have to watch for when you're upgrading, because if you run into the multiple version of the binaries in your Fabric, the process of upgrade may fail. And so then another thing is that there are 3 capabilities of entire channel that can be configured in the capability section of the config text of the YAML file. channel capability, application capability, and order capability. So again, when you're upgrading, you have to make sure you are, you upgrade all of these capabilities. One is for channel, one for application, like your smart contract or chain code, and one for the orderer, which also is part of the policies goes there too. So one thing is that this is a sample configuration for version 2 and version. So this is a version 2 and version 1, right? As you see that the capabilities is the channel and channel capabilities. Then, for example, you define what is true and false, you accept or reject in orderer. So again, when you're upgrading from version 1, version 2, you make sure that you're not leaving anything behind in terms of making sure that those capabilities are upgraded and accepted. So again, in our book, we talk about more in detail. I don't have the time to go, and some of this area are very technical and very advanced level. So you can look at chapter 9 of our book. We talk about this migration in more in depth. When it comes to the upgrading component to a new version, like version 2 of Fabric, there are 4 step process, upgrading the component. So first of all, back up the ledger and MSPs. It's very important. You don't. If you lose your ledger, you lose your Fabric network. You're done if the network is finished. So first, you back up your ledger and all master membership service providers or the credential, everything that you have in a network. Then upgrade the orderer binaries in a rolling fashions to the latest versions, and upgrade the peer binaries, in rolling fashions, and updating the order system channel and any application channel to the latest capabilities. Again, as always, keep the backup from the old versions, upgrade them, test them on do good unit testing on that, make sure it works properly, and then deploy it. So for native deployment, you also need to back up the orderer.yaml file or the core.yaml. It's for the system channel file, and update the content with release artifact, including the new port changes if needed. So again, if you're moving, so one of the things why these are things is important, because in a couple of slides I'm going to explain to you, if you're using AWS Managed Services, and you're going away from AWS to IBM to Oracle, or vice versa, if you're going from AWS Managed Services to AWS Custom Cloud Blockchain platform, you may end up changing the port numbers. I'm just going to give an example. But if you don't pay attention to this, your network is not going to run or up and running. So that's what I'm saying, that there are things that you have to also watch for it, like a main YAML file. So consideration for moving to version 2 is that just watch for Chaincode Lifecycle, as we discussed before. You know that, for example, for the Chaincode Lifecycle, there is a new endorsement involved for alteration, acceptance, and commitment of the chaincode in the network. And then if you are using Go language, also look for the shim changes, because in version 2, what we have is that we have shim API that it allows to access the chaincode through the external API, which instead of having Docker credential, you can access the chaincode through the API credential, the endpoint. And then, which is fantastic if you want to maintain the chaincode. And then again, chaincode logger. Again, if you're using Go language, this has come very handy. And then peer database upgrade, and that's one thing that you have to wait for that, because again, we discussed about a state database, right? And then another area here is that updating the capability level. We discussed that there are 3 different capabilities you have to watch: channel, application, and orderer. And then again, we discussed that before updating the application and channel capability, you need to upgrade your peer binaries to new binaries, because if you forget to update your binaries, it's not going to work, and it's going to be very yes. Go ahead. Yeah. So and then I'm almost done. Like couple of more slides, I'm done, and then I can take questions. Also, upgrading your order binaries before updating the order and channel capabilities to that may fail. So again, if you have multiple version of binaries, it's going to be so failure could lead to multiple version of Fabric binaries with different word state associated with those binaries. And then, as I discussed before, just to emphasize that if you're using AWS Managed Services, if you're working on a new demo product, make sure you use the latest version. Again, AWS Managed Services does not support the version 2, so you may need to create the custom platform at AWS for your blockchain platform. And then if your product is in production stage, check its Fabric versions. Cloud providers like AWS Managed Services still using the version 1.6. And as of April 2021, Hyperledger does not support version 1.6, which means that there are some risk involved. AWS has a good security, but still there are some areas that when it's not supported, it's going to open the door for security risk. Now, a little bit about our company. At Hashflow, we have a team of experts. Two of my co-author of my book are part of my company advisors, Brian Wu and Mark Morris. And they are also working my company. So we're working on different migration plan for going to version 2. Like if going from one cloud provider to another, moving from managed services to the custom platform, or even if you're doing any capability upgrade on your DevOps or Kubernetes, because when you're going from IBM to AWS, you may need to do some stuff on your DevOps too. And again, you can add me on LinkedIn if you want to discuss your project, and then you can also contact us on our website. We would be happy to discuss your project. And one thing is that just to recap what we discussed today, we learned about Hyperledger architecture, essential component of Hyperledger Fabric. And then we learn about some of new features of Hyperledger Fabric version 2. And we also learned that if you want to migrate to Fabric version 2, what are the things we need to take into considerations? And then we also learned about some of the cloud providers and some of the things regarding the Fabric versions we have to watch, especially when you're moving away from one cloud provider to another. And so with that said, I also put some resources here. If you want to learn the Fabric, we have some training for Fabric system admin developer. And then we have also, the company also offer training for AWS. And then for resource book, again, if you want to learn the topic that we discussed in this presentation, I was just scratching the surface. For more in-depth discussion on what we discussed today, you can also get our book, and I would be happy to give you a kind of discount on my book, because I can give you access to our ebook to get access for free for first month. And then I would be happy to take on your question now. Brian, can you hear me?
Yeah, I would ask if everyone, you can unmute and ask your questions. That would be great. I saw a few in the actual, well, I saw one or two. You will get the PowerPoint. We will send that out. So if you do have any other questions, please do ask. Seems like you may have done a very good job, man.
Yeah, let me also look at here because there's some chat here. One of the things is that, Brian, you can also look at the Twitter if there is any question on that one too.
Yeah, so you see the I do see one there that talks about the future. Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I see questions. What is the new future in terms of function? Okay, what is the new? Is it the future or feature could provide in terms of functionality? I mean, does okay? Let me see that. Does the Fabric vision to support the third-party crypto replace the okay, which is not okay. So the what is the new future? I could understand the question. What's the new future could provide in terms of functionality? I mean, Ron, if you can elaborate on that to me. Okay, so upgrading features. Sorry, upgrading could provide in terms of functionality. Oh yes, now I got your question. So the thing is that yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I heard that there are some development in the Hyperledger with regard to that, because maybe in the future they're gonna build a platform. It's a good question actually. In the near future, they maybe Hyperledger come up with their own another tools or another kind of the platform or tools maybe that allows migration from one version to another much easier. But there is one thing you have to understand. Even though the Hyperledger creates such a tool for you as a guy to make your job of migration easier, it's still one of the things you have to watch is that when you're moving from one cloud provider to another, there's challenges that Hyperledger cannot provide solution for them. B is that Hyperledger is not going to give a specific solution to a cloud provider, because Hyperledger is a platform agnostic, and it's not going to give you a specific solution for migrating from one to it. They might give you some solution for migrating, for example, from previous chain code to the new chain code, but still, when it comes to the cloud provider, you have to do it by yourself. And then there was another question. Does Fabric version 2 support third-party cryptography replace with cryptography? So that's a good question. To be honest, I'm not sure if they replace that, you know, because the thing is that Fabric uses its own consensus algorithms, as you know, which is different than Ethereum, where you're using proof of work, then proof of stake, things like that. And again, answer to question is, to the best of my knowledge, the answer is no, it doesn't support for that. But again, I can look into that. If you email me, message me in LinkedIn, I can look into that to see if there is such things.
All right, great. Any more questions, guys? Definitely, if you want to put them in the chat, go ahead. We have a few minutes here. So if you have any more questions, there's one.
Okay, if you know Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud are interested in providing Hyperledger environment. Okay, good question. So to give you an answer on that, Antonio, so unfortunately, Microsoft Azure, they shut down their blockchain platform completely. So we had one chapter on Azure. We end up closing that chapter, removing that chapter in our book. So like starting 4 months ago, Microsoft Azure decided to not offering the blockchain on the cloud platform anymore. So there is no Azure. Google Cloud, as of right now, the Google Cloud, as far as I know, they offer Ethereum, but not sure about the Hyperledger. I know a couple of people in the Google Cloud team. I would be happy to ask them if you want. But what I know is that right now there is Oracle, AWS, and IBM. And then if you want to also look into the Alibaba, they have a very good Hyperledger platform. Blockchain as a service they have offering is a very good platform. You can also look into that. So Brian, you didn't get any question on the Twitter? I'm just joking.
There's one more: how to manage policy in Hyperledger.
Okay, so these questions. Oracle and Alibaba. Yeah, Oracle and Alibaba are very good. Oracle. So there's one thing that I just want to also add the note. When you're picking the cloud providers, again, in my next talk, I'm going to talk about that, about cloud provider, because Oracle has a very good with data science and data analytics, because Oracle is a database company originated, right? So when you are using the Hyperledger for managing the off-the-chain databases and analytics, things like that, Oracle is much better than IBM and AWS. So on the other hand, like for example, right now, IBM might be more expensive, but IBM support version 2. And then AWS, one of the advantages of AWS is that it has a good security as other component that you might easily add to them. And one of the things about Alibaba is that it doesn't have, it's still catching up in the United States. There was a question is how to manage policy with Fabric, SDK, Java. So basically, it's again, if you know about Fabric, I'm not sure about SDK Java, because all I know is that Fabric have a good support for Java and SDK is there. And I'm guessing is that what you need to do, basically, the policy is a YAML file, right? You define, you know, who does what, right, in normal policy. I think I suggest that you get the Fabric documentation on exact implementation of managing the policy, if they offer such things, because as far as I know is that managing the policy, it's not that difficult. You don't need a specific SDK for. I mean, it's not that difficult job to do it. It's just a YAML file that manages in the Fabric network.
All right. Well, excellent. Looks like right now that was it. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and close it out. Again, thank you, Matthew, for joining us today. Very informative. Again, guys, if you have any questions for Matthew, or you can send them to me or send them to Matthew. He shows you his contact info. But again, thank you all for joining. And until next time, guys.
Yeah, thanks again, Brian, for having me, and have a wonderful afternoon. And everyone, again, if you have any questions, you have my LinkedIn address on the deck. You just message me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to discuss it. Have a wonderful afternoon, Brian. Take care. Bye.
Hey, thank you.
You too. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.